During my granddaughter's wedding reception, I watched my daughter-in-law lift a champagne glass and laugh beside the dance floor while a diamond ring sparkled on her hand under the ballroom lights. Everyone else saw a beautiful vintage heirloom. I saw the ring that disappeared from my bedroom safe 3 weeks after my husband's funeral. For a moment, I honestly thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The music was loud. Guests were moving around the ballroom, cameras flashing every few seconds, waiters carrying silver trays through the crowd, but all I could focus on was that ring. My ring. The ring my husband gave me on our 25th anniversary during a rainstorm in Charleston back in 1984. A deep blue sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, custom-made by a jeweler who closed his shop over 20 years ago. There wasn't another one like it. I remembered the exact way Thomas slid it onto my finger while we sat under the awning of a little seafood restaurant near the harbor. He told me it belonged to the strongest woman he knew. After he died, I locked it away because wearing it hurt too much. Then one morning, it was simply gone. I searched every drawer in my house, every jewelry box, every coat pocket. I even accused myself of becoming forgetful with age. My son Daniel had gently suggested maybe I misplaced it while cleaning. My daughter-in-law Vanessa offered to help me search the house that afternoon. I remember she hugged me afterward and said, "Don't worry, Eleanor. It's only a ring." But now, standing inside a crystal-lit ballroom while my granddaughter's wedding band played old Frank Sinatra songs, I watched Vanessa casually twist that sapphire around her finger like it had always belonged to her. The strange thing wasn't the theft. It was the confidence, the audacity. She wore it publicly, proudly, like she wanted me to see it. Like this was some kind of message. I stayed quiet. I smiled at relatives. I complimented the wedding flowers. But inside, something cold slowly settled into my chest. Because in that moment, I realized the missing ring wasn't the real story. The real story was that someone inside my own family believed I was too old, too lonely, and too weak to notice what they had done. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, and until that night in Newport, Rhode Island, I truly believed I knew the people sitting at my family table. The wedding reception continued around me as if nothing had happened. Crystal chandeliers glowed above the ballroom. Soft jazz drifted through the speakers, and guests moved from table to table carrying slices of layered vanilla cake on white porcelain plates. Vanessa stood near the center of it all, like she belonged there more than anyone else. Every time she laughed, her hand lifted naturally into the light. Every movement seemed deliberate. The sapphire caught the glow from the candles and flashed blue across the room like a signal meant only for me. I noticed something else then. She had resized it. The band used to fit my ring finger perfectly, but Vanessa wore it comfortably on her right hand. That meant she had not just found it. She had taken it somewhere, planned for it, paid money to make it hers. A strange calm settled over me after that realization. Not anger. Not yet. Just clarity. I sat quietly at my assigned table near the back corner of the ballroom while younger relatives filled the dance floor. My granddaughter Olivia looked beautiful in her ivory gown, spinning beneath tiny hanging lights while her new husband held her carefully at the waist. For a few minutes, I tried to focus on her happiness instead of the weight growing heavier inside my chest. Then Vanessa approached my table carrying 2 champagne glasses. She smiled warmly as she handed one to me. "You have barely touched your dinner, Eleanor," she said softly. "Are you feeling all right?" Her perfume smelled faintly of gardenias. Expensive. Familiar. I realized it was the same perfume she wore to Thomas's funeral. My fingers tightened around the stem of the glass. "I am fine," I told her. My voice sounded steady enough to surprise even me. Her eyes drifted downward for half a second, almost as if she wanted me to notice the ring again. Then she touched it lightly with her thumb and smiled. "This old thing," she said when she caught me looking. "Daniel said it looked vintage." I thought it matched the wedding. Daniel, my own son, across the ballroom. He was speaking with one of Olivia's uncles near the bar, pretending not to notice us. That hurt more than the theft itself, because suddenly I remembered every moment after Thomas died when Daniel encouraged me to stop worrying about the missing jewelry. Every quiet dismissal, every patient little smile that made me question my own memory. I looked down at the champagne bubbles rising slowly to the surface and understood something terrible. Vanessa may have stolen the ring, but Daniel had helped her convince me I was losing my mind. I barely slept after the wedding. The drive back to my house in Portsmouth felt longer than usual that night, the dark coastal roads stretching endlessly beneath the headlights while old memories kept replaying in my mind with uncomfortable clarity. By the time I unlocked my front door, it was nearly 1 in the morning. The house greeted me with the same heavy silence it had carried ever since Thomas died. I switched on the kitchen light and stood there for a while without removing my coat. The clock above the stove ticked softly. The refrigerator hummed. Everything looked exactly the same as always, yet nothing felt safe anymore. I poured myself a cup of tea I never drank and slowly walked upstairs toward my bedroom. The safe sat inside the back corner of my closet behind several folded blankets. Daniel had installed the new keypad himself 3 months earlier. I remembered how patient he sounded while explaining it to me. "This one is easier, Mom," he had said gently. "You will not have to worry about forgetting combinations anymore." At the time, I thought he was helping me. Now I wondered if he simply wanted control over what remained inside. I opened the safe carefully. The shelves were neat. My insurance papers sat untouched beside a velvet jewelry pouch containing an old pearl necklace and 2 gold bracelets I rarely wore. Nothing else appeared disturbed. But when I looked closer, I noticed faint scratches near the inside hinge. Tiny marks I had never seen before. I crouched lower and ran my fingers across the metal surface. Someone had opened this safe more than once. Someone who knew exactly what they were searching for. I sat down slowly on the bedroom floor after that realization, staring into the empty space where the sapphire ring used to rest. Then another memory returned to me. 2 weeks after Thomas's funeral, Vanessa offered to help organize my closet because, as she gently put it, grief makes everything feel overwhelming. I remembered leaving her alone upstairs for nearly 40 minutes while Daniel drove me to pick up paperwork from the attorney's office. When we returned, Vanessa was kneeling beside the closet with photo albums spread around her, smiling warmly like the perfect daughter-in-law. At the time, I even thanked her for being thoughtful. The humiliation of that memory settled deep into my chest now. Not because she stole from me, because she stood inside my grief and used it like an opportunity. I closed the safe quietly and returned downstairs just as the first pale light of morning began creeping through the kitchen windows. My phone buzzed suddenly against the counter. A text message from Daniel appeared on the screen. "Mom, thanks for coming tonight. Vanessa hopes you enjoyed yourself." I stared at those words for a long moment. Then another message arrived seconds later. "Also, do not worry about the ring Vanessa wore. It is costume jewelry. You probably mistook it for yours." I looked down at the phone and felt something inside me finally harden completely. Because innocent people do not rush to explain things nobody has accused them of. For the next 2 days, I said nothing to Daniel or Vanessa. I answered Daniel's texts politely. I thanked relatives for the wedding photographs they posted online. I even mailed Olivia a handwritten congratulations card with a check tucked carefully inside, just as Thomas and I had always done for family weddings. On the surface, everything appeared normal. But quietly, piece by piece, I began paying attention to details I once ignored. Wednesday morning, I drove to Providence under gray skies and parked across the street from Bradford Jewelers. The storefront looked exactly the way I remembered it from decades earlier. Dark green. Awning. Brass door handle polished bright from years of customers pushing through it. Thomas used to joke that the place smelled richer than a bank vault. When I stepped inside, the familiar scent of velvet display cases and furniture polish wrapped around me instantly. A younger salesman greeted me at first, but after I explained why I came, an older gentleman emerged slowly from the back office. His name was Arthur Bell. I recognized him immediately, even though his hair had turned completely white. He recognized me too. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said softly, almost surprised. "I have not seen you since your husband bought that sapphire anniversary ring." Hearing someone else acknowledge its existence made my throat tighten unexpectedly. Arthur invited me into his office near the back of the store. I carefully showed him the wedding photograph Chloe had sent me the night before. Vanessa stood smiling beside the dance floor, her hand clearly visible around a champagne glass. Arthur adjusted his glasses and stared at the image for several seconds. Then his expression changed. "That is your ring," he said quietly. Without question, I felt strangely calm hearing the confirmation aloud. Arthur leaned back slowly in his chair before adding something that made my pulse quicken. "Actually, I remember this piece recently because someone brought it in for resizing a few months ago." The room suddenly felt very still. Do you remember who? I asked. Arthur hesitated politely. Jewelers protected their clients carefully. But after a long pause, he folded his hands together and sighed. A younger blonde woman, he admitted. And a man was with her. Tall, dark hair. I assumed they were married. Daniel. I lowered my eyes toward the photograph again while Arthur opened a drawer beside his desk. There may still be a work order in our system, he said. He typed quietly on his computer for nearly a minute before turning the monitor slightly toward me. My breath caught immediately. There it was. A scanned invoice dated 3 months earlier. Ring resizing. Sapphire and diamond heirloom piece. Customer name, Vanessa Whitmore. Under authorization signature was another name written. Beneath hers in neat, familiar handwriting. Daniel Whitmore. I stared at my son's signature for several seconds without speaking. The betrayal no longer felt uncertain after that. It became factual, organized, deliberate. Arthur looked at me carefully across the desk. Mrs. Whitmore, he asked gently, did your son and daughter-in-law not have permission to alter this ring? I looked down at the invoice one last time before folding the photograph carefully back into my purse. Then I finally answered the question truthfully. No, I said softly. They believed I was too broken to notice what they were doing. After leaving Bradford Jewelers, I did not drive straight home. Instead, I parked along the waterfront near India Point Park and sat inside my car, watching gray waves move beneath the cold afternoon sky. Seagulls drifted over the harbor, while people hurried past in heavy coats carrying coffee cups and briefcases, completely unaware that my entire understanding of my family had quietly collapsed within the last 48 hours. I kept thinking about Daniel's signature on that invoice. Not the ring itself. Not even Vanessa. My son. The little boy who used to leave hand-drawn birthday cards outside my bedroom door every June. The teenager who cried after accidentally scratching Thomas's truck because he could not bear disappointing his father. Somewhere along the way, that version of Daniel disappeared, and I could not even tell you exactly when it happened. Maybe grief changes people slowly enough that you only recognize it after everything valuable is already gone. My phone rang just after 3 o'clock. Daniel's name appeared across the screen. I stared at it for several seconds before answering. Hi, Mom, he said warmly. Too warmly. His voice carried that careful gentleness people use when they believe someone fragile might break. I was thinking maybe you could come over Sunday afternoon, he continued. Vanessa wants to make dinner for everyone. Olivia and Ethan will probably stop by too. I looked out through the windshield at the dark water moving against the docks. That sounds lovely, I replied calmly. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, almost as if he expected resistance. Are you feeling all right? He asked carefully. You seemed quiet after the wedding. I nearly laughed at the question. Quiet. As though silence was the strangest thing happening in our family. I am just tired, I answered. It has been a long few months. Another pause followed. Then Daniel lowered his voice slightly. Mom, about that ring you thought looked familiar. Vanessa was embarrassed afterward. She feels like maybe you were upset. There it was again. Another soft attempt to shape reality before I even spoke. I leaned back slowly in the driver's seat and closed my eyes for a moment. Daniel, I said gently, do you remember what your father always said about family heirlooms? He hesitated immediately. Not really, he admitted. But I remembered perfectly. Thomas used to say heirlooms carried memory, not value. That was why losing them hurt differently than losing money. They represented trust, legacy, love handed carefully from one generation to another. Your father believed sentimental things mattered because they proved who people were when nobody was watching, I said quietly. Daniel went silent after that, long enough for me to hear his breathing through the phone. Then he forced a small laugh. Well, Vanessa definitely agrees with that, he replied quickly. She loves old family pieces. I opened my eyes and stared out at the water again. Yes, I said softly. I believe she does. After we hung up, I sat there another 10 minutes before starting the car. But this time, I was no longer grieving the loss of the ring. I was grieving the realization that my son had become skilled at lying without raising his voice. Sunday afternoon arrived cold and rainy. Thin streams of water slid across the windshield as I parked outside Daniel and Vanessa's colonial-style house in Bristol. The porch lights glowed warmly against the gray weather, and through the front windows I could already see movement inside the dining room. Normal family life. Plates on the table. Candles lit. Laughter drifting faintly through the walls. For years, Scenes like that used to comfort me. Now they only reminded me how easily appearances could hide dishonesty. Vanessa opened the front door before I even reached it. "Eleanor," she said brightly, stepping forward to kiss my cheek. She wore a cream-colored sweater and dark jeans, soft makeup, her blonde hair loosely pinned back. She looked wholesome, trustworthy, the kind of woman strangers probably described as sweet after meeting her once. And there on her hand sat the sapphire ring again. Calm, unhidden, almost defiant. "Come in," she said warmly. "Dinner is almost ready." The smell of rosemary chicken and fresh bread filled the house as I stepped inside. Olivia and Ethan sat together in the living room flipping through wedding photographs on a tablet, while quiet piano music played somewhere in the background. Daniel appeared from the kitchen carrying wine glasses. The moment his eyes met mine, I noticed it immediately. Tension, tiny, but unmistakable. He was watching me carefully now, measuring every expression. "Mom," he said with forced ease. "Glad you made it." I smiled politely and handed Vanessa the small apple pie I brought from the bakery downtown. "It smells wonderful in here," I said calmly. The performance continued through dinner almost flawlessly. Vanessa laughed at Ethan's jokes. Daniel poured wine for everyone before filling my glass first like an attentive son. Olivia talked happily about honeymoon plans in Vermont during the winter. Anyone watching us would have seen a close family sharing a peaceful Sunday meal together. But beneath the conversation, something heavier moved quietly between the three of us. Every time Vanessa lifted her fork, the sapphire flashed beneath the dining room lights. Every time Daniel noticed me glance toward it, he immediately changed the subject. Halfway through dinner, Vanessa rested her chin lightly against her hand while smiling across the table at Olivia. "Family traditions matter so much now," she said softly, "especially heirlooms passed down through generations." The sentence hung there for a second too long. Then she slowly turned the ring around her finger while speaking. Deliberate again. I set my wine glass down carefully beside my plate. "That ring certainly seems important." "To you?" I said quietly. The room fell still for a moment. Olivia looked between us, confused by the sudden shift in tone. Vanessa smiled without blinking. "Oh, this old thing," she replied lightly. "Daniel surprised me with it recently." I turned toward my son slowly. "Did he?" Daniel reached for his wine immediately without answering. And in that tiny silence, I finally understood something that hurt more deeply than the theft itself. They were no longer simply hiding what they had done. They were rewriting the story together right in front of me. After dinner, Olivia and Ethan moved into the living room to look through honeymoon brochures, while Vanessa carried dessert plates into the kitchen. Daniel followed her a few seconds later, and through the doorway, I could hear their voices drop into hurried whispers the moment they thought I was out of earshot. I remained seated alone at the dining table beside the half-melted candles, slowly stirring cream into my coffee while rain tapped softly against the windows. A few minutes later, Daniel returned carrying fresh cups for everyone. His smile looked thinner now. "Nervous?" "Mom," he said casually while setting down a mug beside me. "Vanessa and I have actually been talking about something important lately." I looked up at him quietly. "Have you?" He nodded and pulled out the chair across from me. "The housing market is incredible right now," he explained. "And honestly, your place in Portsmouth might be too much for you alone these days." There it was, not even subtle anymore. I wrapped both hands around the warm coffee cup without responding. Daniel leaned forward carefully. "We just worry about you," he continued gently. "The stairs, the maintenance, the winters near the water." Vanessa found a beautiful luxury condo community outside Providence. Safe, quiet. They even have staff on site. I almost smiled hearing the word staff, as though grief and age automatically transformed a woman into a child needing supervision. "That is thoughtful," I replied calmly. Daniel relaxed slightly, encouraged by my tone. "If you sold the house now, you could simplify things a lot," he continued. "Travel more. Enjoy life instead of managing property." I glanced toward the kitchen where Vanessa stood drying wine glasses while pretending not to listen. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten again. She had removed the sapphire ring from her hand and placed it openly beside the sink while washing dishes, almost carelessly, as though it already belonged in that house. Daniel followed my eyes immediately and shifted in his seat. "Mom," he said quickly, lowering his voice. "I know things have been emotional since Dad passed away, but you cannot hold on to every object forever. Every object. That was how he described the last meaningful gift his father ever gave me. I set my coffee cup down slowly. Do you know what your father loved most about that house in Portsmouth? I asked quietly. Daniel blinked, caught off guard by the question. The ocean view, he guessed. I shook my head gently. No. He loved that it stayed in the family for 3 generations. Silence settled heavily across the room after that. Even Vanessa stopped drying glasses for a moment. Then Daniel exhaled softly and rubbed his forehead. Mom, nobody is trying to take anything from you, he said. The sentence landed strangely because nobody innocent ever feels the need to say those exact words. I looked at my son sitting across from me and suddenly realized this conversation had likely been planned long before tonight. The ring was never the only thing they wanted. It was simply the first thing they believed they could take without consequences. That night, after I returned home from Daniel and Vanessa's house, I did something I had not done since Thomas's funeral. I unlocked the bottom drawer of his old mahogany desk in the study and removed the thick navy folder labeled Whitmore Family Trust. Dust clung lightly to the corners from years of sitting untouched beneath insurance papers and tax records. Thomas handled most financial matters during our marriage, but before he died, he made me sit beside him at this very desk for nearly 3 hours while he explained everything carefully. At the time, I thought he was simply being practical. Now I wondered if he understood people better than I did. Rain continued, tapping softly against the windows while I carried the folder into the kitchen and spread the documents across the table beneath the warm overhead light. Property records, investment statements, trust agreements, handwritten notes from our attorney. Slowly, page by page, I began reading through everything again. Then I found it. A separate inheritance clause attached specifically to the sapphire ring. I stared at the document for several seconds before reading it a second time to make sure I understood correctly. The ring was never legally mine alone. Thomas had placed it under protected family inheritance instructions nearly 20 years earlier. According to the trust, the sapphire ring was intended to pass directly to our granddaughter Olivia after my death, provided it remained within the Whitmore family estate and was not altered, sold, or transferred without written authorization. My hands became very still on the paper after that realization. Vanessa had not simply stolen sentimental jewelry. She had tampered with a protected family heirloom connected to the trust itself. And Daniel knew it. Of course he knew it. His signature sat beside mine during the original trust review 6 years earlier. I leaned back slowly in the kitchen chair and closed my eyes for a moment. The betrayal suddenly stretched far beyond greed. They were gambling with family assets while assuming I was too distracted by grief to notice legal details. My phone buzzed softly against the table. A text message from Olivia appeared on the screen. Grandma, thank you again for tonight. I feel like something strange is happening between Mom and Dad. Are you okay? I stared at her message for a long moment before setting the phone back down unanswered. Olivia was innocent in all of this. Young, newly married, still believing family meant safety. I refused to drag her into the middle before I understood everything completely. A second text arrived minutes later from Vanessa. I hope you made it home safely. We love you. I actually smiled reading that one. Not because it comforted me, because it sounded so polished, so rehearsed, almost identical to the sympathy cards Vanessa mailed after Thomas died. Every sentence perfectly shaped to appear caring while hiding something colder underneath. I folded the trust papers carefully back into the folder and placed them beside me on the table. Then, for the first time since the wedding, I stopped feeling confused. The grief remained. The disappointment remained. But confusion